On today's show,
with children, when you start to plant those seeds in terms of what they can do, it increases their likelihood of being able to make a selection career-wise in the long run. Just from having that exposure, it allows them to see the possibilities that are available to them. Children who are a part of more underrepresented minority populations, when they see a character in a children's book that looks like them, that really plants the seed. They're like, oh, wow, that's a doctor that looks like me.
Yeah.
That means that I can be anything. And so I wanted the opportunity to really help parents in a collaborative sense to be able to read with their children a book that is interesting, that's full of color, and the characters are just, sort of leaping off of the page while the kids are also practicing their reading. So they're building up their reading skills. There were just so many different reasons why I decided to go this route, because I figured let's catch them a little earlier than maybe middle school. And let's see how that helps to mold and shape them as they embark on their journey of discovering who they are and discovering their purpose.
Welcome to Education Today. I'm your host, Solanke. I spent 15 years in the secondary classroom teaching English, reading, and social studies. I've also been on the other side as a parent of 3 children who have completed the formal schooling years of kindergarten through 12th grade and are now in the college and career stage. Now I'm here to have conversations with teachers, administrators, school staff, students, and parents about all things education. Join me as I cover current topics in education from preschool through to college, career, and beyond. Welcome to today's show. Today I have a returning guest, Dr. Simone Jenkins. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Dr. Jenkins is see if I get this right, the Dean of Associative Science Programs at Hillsborough Community College in the Tampa Bay area, correct?
That is correct. Absolutely.
So previously you were on the show to talk to us about all that the community college has to offer to the community. But today I wanted to hone in on a skill that you have and something that you do that I became aware of years ago when I worked with you. And that is that you are a published author.
Yes, I am.
So before we get into that, could you just tell us something about your background in education? Because that definitely ties into your work as an author.
Absolutely. What's interesting about my background is initially I started off in IT, and I thought that I was going to be going that pathway. And then about a year or two into my professional career, like post-graduation from college, is when I made the decision to become an educator. And that was approximately 18 years ago.
Okay.
So I began my career as a middle school teacher. At the time, there was a severe teaching shortage. And at that point, they had alternative certification programs where all you had to do was hold actually a bachelor's degree.
Yes.
And with that bachelor's degree, it allowed you to get credentialed for specific areas. And at the time, I could teach business education courses. And so that's where my temporary certification was issued. But the more critical areas were reading, language arts, math, science, and so forth. So I decided to become a reading teacher. And I absolutely loved it because I loved the opportunity to really work with students in an area where they may have not seen success or where they struggled. But I wanted to show them approaches that would allow them to thrive and go forth and really be successful in their courses. Because, of course, any educator knows that the foundation for any of your subject areas is reading.
Yes.
And when you don't have that proficiency, that's where you have that barrier to a student being able to succeed in his or her courses, because of the fact that they're not able to read or even comprehend that content, then it serves as a hindrance to them in whatever content area, whether it's math, science, social studies, and so forth.
Yeah.
So I remained in that area. I became a reading coach at Franklin Middle School.
That's where I know you from.
Right, exactly. That's where we met and hit it off immediately, by the way. And I enjoyed the work that I did at Franklin. I love the fact that Franklin was slightly smaller in terms of student population, but when Franklin switched to the all boys academy, it was, of course, as if it was a brand new school. So that means you're looking for new faculty, new staff, and so forth. And then after that, I ended up at Greco Middle School, and I was teaching there for a couple years. And during my tenure as a teacher, I just saw so many students, especially middle students, who were feeling broken, beaten down by what was at the time, the standardized test at the time was FCAT, the Florida assessment, something like that.
Yeah.
And so it was a joy to me to see when my students were just literally climbing within the levels and so forth. And then it was also having to attack their mindset as well, because what students would do is they would say, I'm a level 1, I'm a level 2. And we would have to reset that and say, no, you're a student who happened to score a level 1 on a standardized test, but that's not who you are as a person.
Yeah.
So in seeing all of this taking place, I was like, we have to do something. And specifically the me part of we had to do something. And so I actually wrote my first book in 2012. And what's so funny about that is it actually was a result of a breakup.
Oh.
And yeah, it's a funny story now. It wasn't at the time, but I can laugh about it. My husband and I actually have a good laugh about it. And it resulted from a breakup. He left me a voicemail message saying that our relationship was over, we're through, no explanation, no closure for me. And so it was just it, that was it. I'm like, okay, I have no choice. And so it forced me to move on. And since I didn't get closure by having that conversation with him, the only way I could get closure was for me to write. So I started writing, and then I wrote this book, and I'm like, how did this even happen? So that's what, I guess giving birth to my first book, which was Allison's Awakening.
So you were Allison.
Yeah, yes, actually I was Allison. And what's so funny is that her sister was actually a representation of my more spicy side.
Yeah.
So actually both characters were me, but Allison was the main character. And yes, that was basically me in the fictitious world. And it was so therapeutic. And what was even better is that it was so well received.
Yeah.
And I also wrote the book so that adults would be able to enjoy it, but at the same time, teens, preteens would be able to enjoy and also understand it. And if teachers wanted to, put this book in their classroom libraries, I wanted them to have the flexibility to do so without having to censor so much of the book.
Yeah.
And so that's how that came about. And that was my background essentially that led me into my first book, which allowed me to become a published author.
Yeah. So that first book is Allison's Awakening. That was in 2012.
Yes.
And that was, it was like an adult audience, but you said also teens. But then more recently, you made a foray into writing children's books for very young children.
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that.
Well, in my work, I see a lot of students who are really working to see in what ways they sort of fit into the world. What is their purpose? What is their goal? And as a result of that, it sometimes makes it a little bit more difficult for them to select their majors and to determine what path they should take. And a lot of times it brings on anxiety for students, because sometimes they feel like, oh my gosh, I haven't picked my major yet. What's wrong with me? Why can't I do that? And it's nothing wrong with them. Sometimes it's just a lack of exposure to, various career paths or what is available to them to pursue.
Yeah.
And so the more I started to research this, especially with my background in career education, workforce education, the more I started to see how with children, when you start to plant those seeds in terms of what they can do career-wise, it increases their likelihood of being able to make a selection career-wise in the long run. So even if they may read about a doctor in a children's book early on, they may become a doctor or they may not. But just from having that exposure, it allows them to see the possibilities that are available to them. what works even better is when a child, especially, children who are a part of more underrepresented minority populations, when they
Mhm.
see a character in a children's book that looks like them,
Yeah.
that really plants the seed. They're like, oh, wow, that's a doctor that looks like me.
Yeah.
That means that I can be anything. And so I wanted the opportunity to be able to really help, parents in a collaborative sense, to be
Mhm.
able to read with their children, a book that is interesting, that's full of color, and the characters are just sort of leaping off of the page, while the kids are also practicing their reading, so they're building up their reading skills. They're getting familiar with some words that they may not have seen before, so it provides parents with the opportunity to sort of break down, what does this word mean, or let's sound it out. So there were just so many different reasons why I decided to go this route, because I figured, let's catch them a little earlier
Mhm.
than maybe middle school, and let's see how that helps to mold and shape them as they embark on their journey of discovering who they are and discovering their purpose. So
Yeah.
that's what led me to writing children's books.
That's awesome. So your first book, I believe it's your first children's book, is Dr. K Saves the Day, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that is correct.
So if you were Allison, who is Dr. K?
So
Because he looks
that is so funny.
suspiciously like your husband to me.
He actually, yes, he does. So Dr. K, the character, is inspired by my husband.
Oh,
And of course, I do not have the superior drawing skills that are really required in
yeah.
order to create this phenomenal children's book. Otherwise, you would have some really elevated looking stick figures that would be featured in the book. So I was able to research various illustrators and so forth, and I was able to come across a phenomenal illustrator, and I submitted to her a picture of my husband. I was like, this is who I want Dr. K to look like.
No.
This is, an idea of what I have in mind for the other characters. And we were able to work very collaboratively and synergistically, and it just worked out so beautifully.
Yeah.
So Dr. K was actually a manifestation of my husband, essentially.
That's awesome. So what has the response been like to the book?
I've received some really positive responses. I've even received videos from people who have purchased the book and have shown their children reading the books. I have gotten some emails as well. And it's just so, I can't even explain how great it feels
Oh,
to receive such positive feedback. And, people are still purchasing the book and, saying such great things about, how it's impacted their child and how they want to be like Dr. K when they
yeah.
grow up. And I even had the opportunity recently to visit High Elementary School, which
Oh,
actually back in February. And my husband and I both had a chance to read our books. And the kids were just so receptive.
oh
And
wow.
they, of course, being teachers, always a teacher at heart,
Mm-hmm.
we're asking those probing questions and trying to see, like checking for understanding, and just to have them raise their hands, to be attentive and to be participating in that, it has been a phenomenal ride. And so it's leading me to really hone in on the second book that I'll be writing, which is one of our Dr. K and Friends
Mm-hmm.
series. And in that series, we'll get a chance to meet one of Dr. K's friends, who is a pediatrician.
Is she a female?
She is. So she is an
Wonderful.
African American female. And I wanted to be able to illustrate to kids, and then also have parents, mentors, anybody who's going to be reading to these children. I wanted them to really see that, doctors, come in all different cultures, ethnicities, backgrounds, genders, and so forth. And so now my young ladies will get a chance to see a doctor that looks like them as well.
Yeah.
And in designing my characters, especially with Dr. K Saves the Day, I made sure that I worked in collaboration with the illustrator to be intentional about the characteristics of the characters,
Yeah.
meaning that each of my characters have natural hair, because
Oh wow.
even though that's not the main idea of the book, I want my readers to be proud of who they are.
Yes.
I don't want them to feel as though, oh, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my hair or my skin color or something like that. I want them to embrace who they are and really love their differences, because that's what makes our world beautiful, is everyone's differences. So it's, there are some things that are embedded that are just intentional, but it's just to, get the kids to, feel good about who they are, as well as future careers that they'll be pursuing.
Yeah. That's amazing. That representation is so important, not just in terms of seeing somebody who looks like you racially, but also gender as well. We need girls to see female doctors,
Absolutely.
and other careers too. So, as your experience as a middle school reading coach and reading teacher, but maybe also at the college level, because we still see deficits for freshmen in college too.
Very true.
I just want to talk about some of the issues that we have with reading, like especially with younger kids. Like, why do you think that kids? Well, I believe from my experience as an English teacher that a lot of kids just don't like to read, especially the males, the boys. Why do you think that is?
For me, and just in my experience, I think the lack of desire to read sometimes comes as a result of maybe just not achieving success in reading. And what happens a lot of times with kids is, especially when they're really young and they're very impressionable, when they're doing something that they're not successful with it just becomes a chore. It's like, I don't want to do this. This isn't fun, and not achieving that success, it sort of beats down on you. Even as adults, a lot of times it's like when we, are constantly not achieving goals and so forth, after a while, we're like, geez, this is kind of hard. And so what happens with the kids, from what I've seen and what I've experienced, is that they tend to shy away from it. And so what is typically, I can't read or I'm not able to read well, then translates into I hate reading.
Yes.
So really, that's not what it is. It may translate into I hate reading, but really what it boils down to is the fact that I need help with my reading and I need someone to support me and help me, but I may not feel comfortable enough asking for that help that I need.
Yeah.
So rather than, be vulnerable and say I need help, then it's just easier for me to say I hate reading and not do it.
Yeah.
And another thing that we probably could look at, and there's a lot of research out there as well, in terms of the instructional methodologies utilized to teach reading, especially with regards to boys, because we all know that everyone learns differently. We also have the different types of learners. We've got the visual learners, the auditory learners, kinesthetic, and so on. And a lot of times when reading is taught in a way that is not in alignment with a child's reading learning style, that a lot of times prevents them from being able to learn or to even thrive in that process. And also, depending on how early they're exposed to books and certain words, because certain words are going to be sight words, things that they should be able to recognize.
Yeah.
And if they're not really exposed to those sight words early on, then that can actually pose a problem to them as well. And they fall behind their peers, and kids, unfortunately, are going to naturally compare themselves to their peers. And if they're not reading as well as one of their classmates, then they don't want to read at all, because they're like, I'm not good at this. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the issues that I've noticed and, working with both high school and college students, because to your point, we do, in fact, see some of these issues in college as well, where we do have some students who struggle with reading.
Yeah. And have to take introductory remedial courses, right? Really?
Yes. Yes. So we actually have, because of this being such a widespread problem, our institution, along with other institutions, actually have developmental courses where students will have to, start with those courses. And they've been very successful. But the only drawback of them is that students don't receive college credit for the course, because technically they're not really college level courses.
I see.
And we, it's just difficult because, a student, a lot of times, if they're ready to get started, they're ready to get going.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, I'm not in a college level course
Yeah.
and you want me to take these reading and writing classes. But, essentially in the long run, it's for their long-term success. So
Yeah.
it's also about having those conversations about how beneficial a college level non-credit course can be for their long-term success.
Yeah. And even when you talked about instructional methods, it reminded me of this ongoing argument that teachers have on various teachers' pages on social media about readings and how uh, reading logs just kill reading for kids because now it becomes a
Mhm.
chore, as you said, rather than done for enjoyment. But some teachers hold fast to read and log it. And what did you read? And I think for some kids, it just kills the love of reading.
Right.
I was also thinking about high school. In a high school level, when teachers are allowed to, when female teachers, sometimes, not all of them, are allowed to have some kind of autonomy in the books that they're
Hmm.
assigned. Sometimes I see them assigning what I refer to as a chick flick book to boys,
Right.
and then wonder why the boys aren't interested in the class discussion. You know,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
I love Pride and Prejudice, but 12th grade boys are maybe not so much,
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, to your point, it's, at that age, it's crucial that we are able to provide students with books that they are interested in,
Yeah.
especially if they don't really like reading all that much. And then it's like, I don't really rock with reading, and again, I know, of course, being an educator, it's important to expose students to, certain books, classics and things like that. But then also to have a book that is relatable,
Yeah.
that they can connect with
Yeah.
and allow them that opportunity to get interested in it, that is just, providing them with an experience where it's like, hey, you know what? Maybe reading isn't so bad
Hmm.
because realistically speaking, when we get to adulthood, I read books that I typically gravitate toward or that I'm interested in or, that really align with my core values.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go back and read A Tale of Two Cities. It was great back when I was in the ninth grade, but I not necessarily a book I'm going to go back and read
Yeah.
just because. But it's so I definitely get that perspective as well.
So we talked earlier about the role of standardized testing and how that can be like a deal killer when it comes to getting kids motivated to read
Hmm.
because of some of the things attached to it, like the labeling of kids. I'm not sure if you're aware of this because I know you're no longer in K through 12, but what do you
Hmm.
think about this new switch that we've had in the past few years in terms of English curriculum in middle school and high school, where it's moved from fiction to nonfiction to more closely align with standardized reading tests. So whereas before the kids were reading quite a few novels from sixth grade to 12th grade, now it's a lot of nonfiction texts.
Right. I really I believe in the importance of fiction as
Mhm.
well as nonfiction. I
Yeah.
really believe in the diversity of the content and the books that we provide our students, especially when they are in high school. And that mainly comes from the fact that it's just, I feel that with fiction, especially, there are so many themes that can be incorporated into books that can be utilized for real life experiences.
Yeah.
And I remember many, many moons ago when I was in high school, having these opportunities to engage in conversations that were very profound. And they were based on a lot of fictional books and short
Hmm.
stories, but they had themes that we talked about that were relevant in today's society.
Yeah.
Just as an example, one of the books that I read in high school was A Scarlet Letter.
Yeah.
And the themes that are presented within A Scarlet Letter, there are some things that are actually really prevalent within today's society. How, people get marginalized because of
Hmm.
maybe decisions that they've made or maybe things that they're going through or their situations and so forth. And so I just believe that it's more fruitful to allow students the opportunity to not only read nonfiction because it is important,
Hmm.
but give them that opportunity to experience fiction and see firsthand how creativity is utilized to be able to teach life lessons and how they can grow as individuals as a result. Because a lot of times when they go through those high school experiences, even years after they graduate, such as myself, you'll still remember those experiences and you'll still remember themes of those books, even though it may be 20, 30 years since you initially read them.
Yeah.
So with regards to the standardized testing, I do understand that there needs to be some form of assessment to determine students' comprehension, to determine whether or not they've actually reached a level of achievement that's going to allow them to be successful in the next grade. To be honest, I just have yet to find a standardized test that has done just that.
Yeah.
I remember vividly working with students and preparing them for FCAT and teaching them specific strategies and approaches in order to succeed on the test. And they did. They did a phenomenal job once they were taught those strategies. But then I also have to ask myself the question, does it truly demonstrate their level of comprehension, or does it demonstrate their level of being able to utilize approaches effectively in order to select a correct answer?
Yeah.
So that's I'm kind of divided with that one, because again, I do believe in, assessment in the sense to where it's going to be fair and equitable and measure accurately whether a student has achieved a level of success, especially what's necessary in order for them to move on and thrive throughout their education journey. But when it starts getting to the point to where it gets almost impossible, and to a point to where, students are experiencing anxiety and having anxiety attacks during tests, and that is where we really need to come together and say, okay, what is the best way for us to administer an assessment?
Yeah, that's good. So we've talked about many things that are barriers to students reading and enjoying reading. So how do we get these kids off their tablets and inspire these reluctant readers to like reading and to want to read?
Well, maybe for some, we may have to put books on their tablets.
Yeah.
And because I know for a couple kids, when I pulled up my book, or even if my husband has pulled up his book on a tablet, they love it. They think it's like a cartoon, because when they, slide to the left and they're turning the page, all of a sudden it's like, wow, especially when it's a children's book, they think it's a cartoon. So they are just loving it.
Yeah.
So perhaps it's a matter of maybe an intersection of both, to where they get the opportunity to still be on their tablets, but at the same time, they're doing something that's going to be educational and that's going to, facilitate their growth. But then I'm also really old school, so I like my hard copy books. I'm the ones who's still purchasing those, those actual books. I do listen to books on tapes and various podcasts and so forth, and I love them. But then I love my books that I can hold in my hand.
Yeah.
So sometimes it may be, and I know that sometimes, parents' time is a little limited, but budgeting some time to sit down with a child, just mom and dad or kids or whoever is involved in that child's life, whoever may be a prominent figure in their life, and having them sit down and open up a tangible book and making it fun for them, making it seem like they're going on an adventure. With Dr. K Saves the Day, for example, let the child, play the role of Dr. K and pretend like they're the ones who's like, kind of giving an examination to one of the kids who may be sick or may not feel well or something like that, kind of transforming it into this adventure so that kids have these amazing experiences. And then as a result, they develop this love of reading, and then they see the value of having a tangible book in their hands.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Dr. Jenkins, thank you so much for talking to us today about your authorship and your 2 books, and generally about reading in our society today, and some of the pitfalls that we see in students, and some of the things that we can do to improve reading. If anybody listening is interested in buying either Allison's Awakening, your first novel, or your children's book, Dr. K Saves the Day, where can they find it?
Well, actually, they can go on Amazon. Both books are on Amazon, and they get searched by either my name or searched by the title of the book. and they can find both those books there. And I believe Allison's Awakening is still available on barnesandnoble.com as well.
Just by interest, is it also available as an audiobook?
You know what? I have not done that yet. So that might actually have to be my next project. I love that idea.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today and telling us all about your adventures in writing and inspiring young readers to love to read. And it sounds like the illustrations may be key here for younger readers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If we can capture them, especially from a visual perspective, I think we've got them hooked.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This was great.
Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Education Today. We'll be back next time with more current topics on all things education. In the meantime, you can email any questions or comments you have about the show to edtodaypodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, please hit the subscribe button on whichever platform you are listening so we can continue to expand our reach. We are listener supported, so if you're able to make a small monthly donation, you can do so by clicking the Support This Podcast link at the bottom of the show notes. Check out my blog for more about my experiences as a classroom teacher at medium.com/@SOCO. That's medium.com/@SOHKOR. You can also find me on Instagram at SOCO_writes. That's SOHKOR_writes. See you next time, and thank you again for listening.